Hello and welcome everyone to today's webinar. It's so great to see many of you here joining. This webinar is about fostering a system lens to peace building and social justice work through the pandemic through Systems Justice Labs in Cape Town, which our incredible presentees here will be sharing more about. I'm Julie from the Build Up team, and we're excited to be joined by our partners from the Bertha Centre. We have Fergus here and Ncedisa. Build Up and the Bertha Centre are co-organizing this year's Build Peace Conference. Build Peace, if you haven't heard of it or don't know, is a global conference and community of practice that explores emergent challenges to peace in a digital age and peace-building innovations to address these challenges. We're having a Build Peace Conference this year in Cape Town, which is deeply connected to what you'll hear about today and the topics therein. It is on social justice and pandemic in the digital age. We'll be both in Cape Town, situation permitting, and online from November 6th to 8th. And you can see more and register and submit applications to contribute through July 31st at howtobuildpeace.org. So with that said, I'll let Fergus and Ncedisa introduce themselves and tell us more specifically about the Bertha Centre, and then continue to tell us more about systems thinking and the Systems Justice Labs of today's topic. But for instructions for anyone that's new to this platform, we're glad you're here and we'll really love to hear from you. We'll have an interactive portion after a brief presentation where you can ask questions. So feel free to use at the bottom of the page an ask questions feature or the chatting feature to queue up some questions for later. Just a note as well that we will be recording this. So anything that you chat in or ask in a question there will be a part of that recording. If that's something that is not acceptable to you or that you wouldn't like, please just private message me and I can take your name out of that. All right, thank you, Fergus and Ncedisa. Go ahead.
Thanks so much, Julie. So thank you all for tuning in. We look forward to sharing some initial information about the Bertha Centre, the Build Up Bertha Centre partnership, and the Systems Lab approach to this year's Build Peace conference. Ncedisa, would you like to kick us off with a little intro from the Bertha Centre?
Sure, thanks a lot, Fergus. And yeah, thank you everyone for being here. So yeah, my name is Ncedisa. I'm part of the Systems Justice Systems Innovation team at the Bertha Centre. And yeah, as you heard, I work with Fergus. So just a quick background to the Bertha Centre. It is close to 10 years old and is an academic centre based in the Graduate School of Business in Cape Town's UCT. The idea of inserting a centre for social innovation and entrepreneurship was seeded by and supported by a family foundation, Bertha Foundation, which supports social justice specifically. And the thinking was that let's get innovation and entrepreneurship into graduate schools of business. Let's influence how those future business leaders are thinking going forward so that we can contribute to long-term structural change. That was the thinking. And over the years, you know, the centre's grown to have quite a few portfolios across different sectors. But what's most pertinent to us being here right now is that the systems innovation portfolio has most recently begun to deliberately merge with the social justice portfolio to come up with what we're calling systems justice. The reason for this is this: systems thinking, systems innovation as we define it is about any kind of innovation, project, plan, organization, mobilization that is going to disrupt the foundations of a system in some way. And the foundations of the systems being the value systems, the roles, the responsibility, decision-making, resource flows, who gets to do and see and be where and do what. So we kind of realized after having these portfolios being together parallel to each other, we very quickly realized that they actually speak to each other. The systems language, the systems framework very much can be in service to what social justice wants to move towards. So yeah, what made sense for us is to start to merge systems justice, and we have a few projects that are in service to exactly that. And Build Peace being one of those, an example of those specifically. So yeah, that's just a quick introduction to the centre itself, systems justice itself, and if I may also just talk a few words around systems thinking, I guess. When we talk about making change in a system, in a social system, we do so against the backdrop of years and years of different organizations, different movements, different attempts to make changes in systems for the better, to bring healing to the system, as it were. But what we've realized is that the problems, the challenges, they don't go away. The word that we hear so often in systems thinking is that they're intractable. Systems thinking becomes pertinent because what it enables us to do is to apply frameworks in a very humble way, right? But apply frameworks and sensibilities that help us make sense of the connections that make up systems, that help us make sense of the relationships that hold up systems, and that help us to start to tweak that systems at those points, at strategic points of systems, in the connections and in the relationships. By applying those frameworks, we might go through some of them a little bit later, they might come up in the questions, but by applying those frameworks in service to actually kind of changing the system, we can start to move towards sustainable change going forward. And as I said earlier, our interest is in applying those frameworks towards advancing sustainable structural change that can be seen and felt at a real ground level, as opposed to changes that can be talked about at an academic level. I'm going to stop there for now. Fergus, do you want to?
Yeah. So when we started to think about how we could apply this way of thinking and this way of approaching social issues to the partnering with Build Up towards Build Peace 2020, we recognized that there was a tension around only limiting the experience of Build Peace and our partnering here in Cape Town to the conference itself as a showcasing and presenting of short talks, workshops, exhibitors, working in the peace building space. We thought, how could we bring a systemic lens? How could we bring a framework of systems thinking to the experience of the conference in November? And one of the routes discussed in trying to make that happen was to invite a collection of organizations, partners, people in our network across South Africa to join what we are calling a system justice lab. This is a bringing together of a variety of different systems thinking tools and frameworks, and bringing a cohort of 7 organizations in each of the sub-themes: urban space, identity polarization, and surveillance capitalism, bringing them through a 12-week learning journey of mapping their environment, the ecosystem where we exist and where their work takes place, and finding new ways of surfacing the kinds of narratives that we are promoting, that we are perpetuating, and that we may want to change with innovative and justice-oriented solutions. So the idea was, well, Build Up have a fantastic journey so far of putting on these conferences where we are sharing, exposing each other to one another's work, and catalyzing new partnerships and solutions. And we thought that for Build Peace 2020, how could we invite a systemic approach to these themes into the conference? And so with the conference being themed around social justice and pandemic, with the aforementioned sub-themes, we recognized that the end point of these labs would be primarily the experience of the conference, where those participating in the labs, a series of workshops and dialogues across those 12 weeks, would be able to present their findings, their insights, and the mapping of the systems in which their work takes place at the conference. And so that's sort of the systems labs at a high level. A little bit more about what that entails. So the organizations in those different tracks would form a cohort. We would initiate with a deeper inquiry into the theme. So take identity polarization, for example. The 7 organizations in that cohort would be invited to deepen their understanding, problematization of that theme, of that issue in South Africa and in the Cape Town specific context. And then we would proceed to have a series of deep dive dialogue interviews where we'd be sitting with each organization and digging in more deeply into the narrative of their work and their purpose as it relates to how they understand their part that they're playing in their system. And after that, it would lead to a systems thinking workshop with our team at Bertha Centre, which would help to equip or share different frames, tools, ways of working in this way. And then subsequently, we would put together a where the different individual cohort members would come together and actually take these tools, these frameworks, and apply themselves to mapping, staking out the different key mechanisms, key lever points in their system according to how they've problematized it early on in the process. That's really just a high-level sense of what it would entail. The presenting from that synthesis workshop would then take place at Build Peace 2020 in the form of short talks and workshops. And in an ideal world, those cohorts stay together and become the peace innovators for which Build Up are responsible for running their innovation processes. So that's just a sort of broad brushstroke of what the System Justice Lab is. But again, like Ncedisa pointed out, it's really about shifting the way that we are thinking, being aware and acknowledging our role in the problem that we find ourselves in. And when it comes to social justice and pandemic and these 3 sub-themes, it's very critical that we first ground ourselves and root ourselves in our context and in our immediate experience, rather than the abstraction of some of the predominant frames and solution thinking that often throws us into the future before we've really present ourselves with the experience of what is going on. In a complex, ever-changing world, it's actually critical to pause, take stock, and to recognize the interconnection of all different parts. And so that's really how we'd like to approach Build Peace 2020 and bringing that style of thinking and working into our partnership with Build Up. But Ncedisa, if you could tell us a little more about how those themes, urban space, identity polarization, and surveillance capitalism, relates specifically to the Cape Town context, I think that would be useful.
Cool, thanks, Fergus. For those of you who haven't been to Cape Town, it would take you probably 3 hours, 2 hours of driving around Cape Town to see that it's the poster child of geospatial violence. Part of the legacy of colonialism and apartheid in Cape Town, you can see in terms of the public space very, very clearly in terms of who gets access to where and what different spaces look like. So what that translates into or impacts on quite immediately is that it feeds into and actually amplifies identity polarization within the Cape Town context, where in the times of apartheid, that polarization, and still today, but that polarization was along race-based lines. In the current, as I said, is still today, but there's also in terms of placing foreign nationals at risk. The city plays that out very, very well. If you were to even walk around now during COVID, you can also just clearly see who is most at risk. And then, of course, around surveillance capitalism, I guess if you were to ask your question of who's in the best position to leverage some kind of profit out of that, it would be around security companies, and it also would be around the people at the top end of the capitalism pyramid, if there is such a term. So Cape Town is what Fergus was talking about engaging with systems and structural justice on an experiential level, Cape Town affords that opportunity in a massive way. A lot of the organizations that are trying to bring about structural change from this city have really rich experiences, learnings, curiosities, practices that would be, very much in service and make the learnings from this gathering and this convening really, really fruitful. And I think also if you tease out that question along different lines, how these themes are pertinent to what it is that we're trying to do, you'd also find other different relationships if you tease out that questions from a different angle as well. But I'll just do those ones for now. So I think perhaps the last point that we could go through is around systems justice and peace building during the pandemic as a final wrap before taking some questions. What do you think, Fergus? Do you think you can lead with that?
Thank you. That would be great. I'm going to sort of share my own experience with working in Cape Town. So as Ncedisa has summarized, Cape Town is an incredible and also overwhelming experience to live and work in, and it's visceral. It's a physical experience, the injustice and inequality in the city. And when we talk about peace building and we talk about social justice and the need to protect this work and these spaces and these communities of practice during a time where a lot is changing and there's a lot of opportunity in this crisis for both certain prevailing systems of power and authority, as well as opportunities for new ideas and for activism of a new kind and innovations towards better social conditions. It's important for us to take stock of the lessons and of the variety of reflections and imaginations that have been sparked during this crazy time. Here in Cape Town, a kind of classic example of peace building from the ground up, or systems justice from the ground up, is the tremendous effort of the community action networks and the Cape Town Together movement, which is really a phenomenal example of citizen-led, people-led, people purpose-led, local specific, and at the same time networked learning towards bridging divides, bridging the so-called islands of our different social spaces and divided neighborhoods. And so we're seeing live, in situ, in the last few weeks, in the last few months, these experiments in shifting the way our systems respond to the needs of people and communities. And we're seeing peace building from a agency-oriented ground-up perspective from neighborhoods and communities as leading the efforts towards ensuring that this crisis doesn't see the worst of us. And so with this in mind, it's incredibly exciting and I think significant, critical, to have a placeholder, a space, Build Peace 2020, later in November, depending on conditions, online, in place, at Philippi Village, as a point of communion to bring together some of the key lessons, to rope together some of the insights from the labs that I discussed prior, and to reflect and think for a moment on what this time means for how we decide to take our social justice and peace building work forward into the very uncertain and interesting times ahead. And I'm going to leave it at that and hand over to Julie to moderate the questions.
Yes, thank you both so much for that intro, both into the labs and its connection to the Build Peace Conference and into systems thinking in general. I have a lot of questions myself. We have a few also from people here and on Facebook. And who wants to start our questions is actually Helena, who has a burning one. So we'll let her start.
So thank you so much, Fergus and Ncedisa, for joining us and for giving that presentation. My name's Helena. I'm the one of the directors at Build Up, and I'm so excited about this collaboration and also the bringing together of systems thinking and systems justice into the frame of how we're thinking about peace building in the digital era at Build Up and at Build Peace. You know, you both know that I'm quite new to systems thinking and quite excited about it because a lot of what you share about the importance of this and framing issues really resonates with how I've at least been trying to understand the world and my work for many years, but just much more structured. One of the things that really helped me better understand systems thinking when I first came across it was actually you both sharing examples of the kinds of insights that come out of a systems thinking process. So I was just wondering if I could put you on the spot to share an insight, maybe Ncedisa, from your experience of when you've done a similar process in Cape Town or in South Africa, what's an insight that's come out that's been really remarkable and that wouldn't have come out if you hadn't used that lens? That would be super great to hear about. Thank you.
That's a great question. Thank you, Helena, and it's nice to see you again. So the first example that comes to mind when you ask that question is a framing called inscaping, which just very, very briefly, inscaping says this: in organizations and mobilizations, we tend to focus very much on the roles, the responsibility, like the policies, the operational stuff, and we don't really focus on people's inner experiences, the people who are part of that organization. And by inner experiences, we're not talking just emotions, we're talking the aspirations, the curiosities, the values, the experiences that they're having outside that they're bringing into the space. And inscaping says this: especially if you want to fulfill a social purpose, an external to where your organization is, you've really got to pay attention to the inner lives of those people who are working together to fulfill that social purpose. Because in doing that, you start to actually get a more experiential, because we are living in the worlds that we want to change, right? So by surfacing the inner experiences that we bring into this work that we do, it actually gives us a more creative and a more creative approach to our work and a more authentic way of engaging with our work. Because what happens is that our relationships become better, and we also our relationships become better, and we develop a sense of empathy both for each other. Not develop, but deepen a sense of empathy both for each other and outside. So that for me was a theory for a while, until I actually really saw it in action. Well, I was like, that makes sense. But when I really saw it in action was in an organization that had been cultivated and built in community by an author, one of the authors of Inscaping, one of our colleagues, Warren Nielsen. So he authored it with his partner, Tanner Paddock. And they'd created a space where inscaping was a practice that they did quite regularly. And it can look like anything. It can look like, it's just making time in whatever makes sense in your organization to surface your inexperience. And in the space that they'd made inscaping part of the practice, what happened is that, and it was an organizational space, right? But what happened is that one of the individuals who was part of that space found herself in a point of just danger, because life on life's terms puts you in a point of danger sometimes, right? And all she could think to do is to move herself into that inscaped space, because she knew it to be the safest space that she could be. And without anyone having talked about what to do with this, kind of disruption, because it was a disruption to the organizational space that we usually, that that space was nested into, but without anyone having to decide and go, what do we do, and find out a policy document or anything like that. There was a mobilization that knew to take the next right action where she found the safety that she was looking for. This is my point. On reflecting on it later, I realized that as we try to move towards social purpose, we try to contribute towards healing the world. Through inscaping, our organizations afford us an opportunity in certain critical moments for us also to access that healing as change agents. And I think I don't know if I've lost my video, my screen cut out. So that was a huge insight for me to try to start to shift that my social purpose work can actually be in specific moments, be a place of healing even for myself, which I think is something that's really pertinent for, for activists, but for people who are pushing for a social good in very unforgiving circumstances, who might sometimes forget that they too deserve a form of healing. So yeah, that's my long-winded response to that, Helena.
Thank you so much. And I know we have some more questions. Julie, will you be moderating those?
Yeah, I'll be calling them in.
Great.
Yeah. At some point I am going to take host privilege and ask my own, but let's from Aloha, who asked what might be missing in systems justice projects today, and in Cape Town in particular, that we may bring in.
Sure.
Sure. That's a wonderful question.
So I'd have to, my answer would lean towards my own bias, which is towards celebration and sort of creativity as a go-to when it comes to really difficult and terrible problems. So I think that a lot of the responses, systems justice responses and projects in and around Cape Town, I don't want to say they lack this, but I feel like there is a real seriousness, a heaviness, a scarcity, not having a problematization to the degree that sometimes there is a leaning on a victim-oriented way of dealing with certain issues and problem solving. And so I would say what might be missing is a sort of celebration-oriented approach to surfacing what are the unacknowledged, often unacknowledged due to the prevailing power systems of what matters and what counts and what narratives have legitimacy. What are the unacknowledged resources, stories, knowledge, skills in communities, areas, locales, where a project is being utilized towards a systems justice outcome? All right, so it's kind of like I see the comment, not necessarily what's missing, what could make a real difference. Well, I think that having a celebration-oriented approach to problem solving and harnessing the creativity of individuals involved in an intervention or a project can make a real difference. It creates a different, again, coming back to the experience as reference to this inscaping. How do we change from the inside out? How do we shift systems by recognizing that if we genuinely shift the attitude and character of our own involvement in a project, in a program, in an intervention, that can make all the difference. It is contagious, just the same as fear, shock, crisis shuts us down and limits us in our application of our various creative faculties and skills to a problem. So can celebration or a creative or sort of appreciative way of talking about a problem, an appreciative and celebration way of talking about a difficult area or community that's affected by crisis, can really shift the way that we design our solutions and design our ways of working. So I think it's about fundamentally going, hold on, what is there to celebrate? What is, who do we live with? Who are we living with? What is this place? What does this place mean to me? First and foremost, before dropping into the crisis and panic mode that often puts us in a position of relying heavily on ways of running projects, ways of running programs that are part of a system that is legitimate and has power. You know, whether you want to connect it to the broader problematization of, you know, the aid industry or the development industry, sure you can, but these prevailing ways of doing things polarize those involved in the intervention in the systems justice work, and we need to recognize that there are no you know, in an ideal sort of situation, we're not framing it as beneficiaries and interveners or project project leads and then the beneficiary. We're recognizing it as a dialogue. So that's what I think is missing, or what could really add a lot of power to a lot of these interventions, is adding a creative lens. In the event of the CANs, the Community Action Networks in Cape Town Together, we see a beautiful flourishing of different artists, communities of artists, creatives starting to integrate their way of communicating new narratives, of communicating new solutions into the narrative of crisis and fight and flight. And that's where a lot more people are being reached, and a lot more stories and resources are being opened up.
If I may add to that, Fergus, I really love how specific you were. I'm going to give a very generalist response as well, which is equally legitimate. Is that what I think you can bring as well is actually your practical experience, because there's your practical experience of the work that you've been doing from your locale. This, you know, because the fact of the matter is you are navigating complex systems, you are applying systemic intels in order to try and bring about a specific change. The fact that you don't necessarily speak the frames or the languages in your day-to-day work is totally immaterial. So just even in your own practical experience, and something happens when you bring the people together who are really trying to push towards some sort of positive change. You know, there's a knowledge and a heart and a pulse that is very generative, that kind of surfaces and arises out of that convening, which can, I think, and from what we've seen in past kind of labs that we've, like the systems change and social impact course, which I think can help propel forward movement as a collective. So your own practical experience as well will be hugely valid and valuable. Sorry.
Can I ask a follow-on question to this? And this may come from my own ignorance about systems thinking and systems justice, but I think of the application of systems thinking as being quite technical, that there's some sort of mapping that takes place and then analysis based on that mapping. But the way you both are talking about it, Ncedisa, you earlier talked about healing the system. You talked about relationships, holding it up. Fergus, you're talking about creativity and this human element, allowing that to come out. I'm seeing this tension between what I thought systems thinking was and the way that you're explaining it in this very human way. Can you talk about that balance and how those interplay, both the technical and the human aspects?
And thank you for that question as well. That's something that we're engaging with as well. What's happened predominantly in the canon on systems thinking specifically is that it has been quite technical, right? You'll have frameworks like panarchy and just terms, and the Fibonacci, I don't even know how to say it properly, but the Fibonacci scale out, that pattern, what's it called? But that universal pattern of scaling out, that's fractal. Fibonacci. Yes, that guy. Yeah. There we go. Thank you. Thank you. So there have been for quite some time quite a technical approach to systems thinking. It's the same kind of criticism that's been leveraged at institutional theory as well, right? And what I think what we try to do is to bring that technical stuff there. There's a systems mapping as well, but to also really surface and elevate the fact that there is a human sensibility that is required in the application of this technical stuff. So the technical stuff, we kind of tend to talk about it as it being in the abstract sphere, and then the more human stuff, we talk about grounding it. So I don't know if I said this earlier, but when we talk about applying the framework of panarchy, we say it's a technical framework, but you really need to humble that framework. So we teach it in community with empathy. What is the role and the place in empathy when you apply this, this framework called panarchy? Because the fact of the matter is, and the reality of the matter is, there is no framework or theory out there that you can apply and go 1 + 1 and get 2, right? Those are the socio-ecological systems that we are in that defy that approach. And a lot of our world history has worked on that presumption that that's how we, there's a situation, you apply a solution, and it's fixed. But that's an illusion. So how we like to approach this is to try and balance it out. Yes, bring the technical stuff out, but also ground it in real human sensibilities, because that really is the meat and the juice of it. That's really where the magic can happen. Trying to navigate systems is in many ways an exercise in surrender. And by that, I mean that we need to always remember that it is an illusion to think that you can master the system. So yes, apply the frameworks with as much humanity as we can, and try and move towards a certain place. But it's really, really important to let go of the illusion that you are now going to control the system, and how you enact that is keeping a close eye on what your nudge. Yeah, so that's what we talk about. We say you can nudge at a system. So keep a close eye on where your nudge is leading, and keep a healthy dose of humility in there, so that if your nudge is leading somewhere where it shouldn't go, if your nudge is actually supporting the degenerative system that you're trying to change, then A, you need to be able to pick that up, and B, you need to have the humility to make the changes that are required in order to mitigate against that. So I hope that answers your question. We do tend to bring both the yin and the yang into our approaches to system. I guess what it means is that when we're talking about it, we talk more about the system sensibilities than the technicality. But in engaging with it, we try to engage with both, whether one grounds the other.
Thank you for that. That's really profound, the way that you've described the humility and surrender. And it's clear that undergirding all of your work is this deep technical understanding. I really appreciate that response. We have another question, which I think Fergus has started to respond to by providing resources in the chat of where people can learn more. But we have an attendee here who asks, would the Systems Justice Labs training be open to organizations outside of Cape Town, or how could one apply for it? And if I can just broaden this question, I think many of us tuning in are going, how can we learn more? What resources can we use to be more engaged in this? Are there resources or opportunities to engage with this with the Bertha Centre? So if we could broaden that question to, how can we be involved?
Sure. So to start, the System Justice Lab that we're running in coordination with Build Up towards Build Peace and beyond, that's really the first time we're doing it like that, and it very much is a pilot, and it's something that we're containing to South Africa in order to, I guess, limit as much as we can the complexity of what we're taking on. And it's something that I know that the Build Up team is also very excited about learning from. And so we're trying to keep that at a scale that we can manage. But in terms of going forward, staying in touch and tracking this process and hopefully being able to share it with the broader Build Up and Bertha Centre communities as we move along, I think is something that we'd really like to explore. and hopefully that leads to opportunities for learning from tracking that process or following that journey in whatever way is possible. And then along with that, in terms of systems thinking and systems change methodologies, there are some fantastic resources that the System Justice team has online on a website that I'll pop into the chat box now called Systems Play. So that's one really great place to go and get a sense of, you could say, the canon or lexicon, the technical lexicon of systems change and thinking work. And then there's the Systems Change and Social Impact course, which is going online and taking place in November, or correct me if I'm wrong, October, yes. And that Ncedisa can provide further details on that. Oh yes, and before I pass the baton, I'll also pop into the link a MOOC, a MOOC that the Bertha Centre currently has on Coursera for change makers. And within that MOOC, there are references to some of the methodologies and thinking that we've referred to in this conversation. But I'll hand over to Ncedisa to continue with the system change course, and I'll pop the rest in the links.
Thanks, Fergus. So yeah, the systems change course will be online this year from beginning of October through to and we'll be running from 9 weeks thereafter. For those 9 weeks, what we're hoping to achieve, we're hoping to curate a learning journey made up of series of almost provocations, right? That are hopefully, as Fergus was mentioning earlier about that change in attitude that's also required to actually bring about change externally, but that will hopefully seed and incite a transformative experience throughout that journey. And what that 9 weeks is characterized by, what it's made up of, is what we hope is a wonderful blend, what we think is a wonderful blend, let me not say what we hope, is a wonderful blend of the technical systems tools, as well as the grounded strategies of instances of bringing about systems change. And some of those strategies that we look at are around advocacy or resourcing, and resourcing in terms of as people, and resourcing in terms of financial resourcing. So I'm not sure if our website is, I think we do have a website that's up to date in terms of that. We were having to do a few changes and pivots in light of the fact that we're going online, but I can also drop that into this chat on the other side of this during this conversation. I wanted to, and we really, what we try to do in the systems change course as well is we try to make up the system, right? We try to make up a representation or a microcosm of the system, if I can put it that way. So you'll have people who are pushing for social change on the ground. We'll have people who are pushing for change within the public sector. We'll have people who are controlling the resource flows that are supposedly towards, let's say, socio-ecological impact or jobs or whatever the case may be. So we try and recreate the system in that cohort, and then together, try and surface the different learnings and knowledges that each person brings into that cohort, with the view to effectively, with the view to actually capacitate those people in such a way that they can go back and help strengthen their organizational transformative capacity. Oh, I see Fergus has shared that. Thank you very much. And I just wanted to say, as well as the Systems Play resource, please also just any questions or comments or curiosities that you may encounter if you play with those resources, we really would love to hear from you as well. So don't hesitate to reach out to us.
That's an awesome offer. Thank you both for sharing those resources and for being here today. I personally would love to talk all day, but we committed to this 45 minutes. So I just want to thank you so much for sharing your work and sharing these additional ways to get involved. You can see more about the Bertha Centre work in the links that they shared there. I personally am excited about the course that you have talked about. You can follow their work through social media, and they have a newsletter as well that I recommend signing up to. It's got great content. Fergus talked about the conference as a communion. I love that framing, and I just want to reiterate being very excited to seeing you at that communion where the systems justice labs come to be able to share, you know, where they're at and their process and what they've come up with through that process. And want to remind those listening that you can also join this conference, the Build Peace Conference. If you are in Cape Town, it will be held at the Philippi Village. COVID situation pending, but it's also being designed fully as a fully integrated online conference as well. So you can join from anywhere, and you can also contribute. Applications are still open through the 31st. And you can see more about that at howtobuildpeace.org. Do either of you have any final thoughts of goodbye, or would you just like to wave to everyone? Thank you again so much. Yeah, perfect. Awesome. Thank you so much both. This recording will be available on the website, and I'll post about that shortly. All right. Bye, everyone. Thank you for attending.
Thanks. Bye.